We are going to kick off the search firm panel now. We have a tremendous group with us today. I think it's going to be a wonderful experience. So just to give you a quick background, we have Grant Higgison from Park Executive Search, Jeff Schemmel from College Sports Solutions, Mike Thomas from CarrSports Consulting, and Drew Turner from Collegiate Sports Associates. So I'm going to kick it off and let them introduce themselves. Grant, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Kay. Happy to do it. Everyone, thanks so much for your time. A lot of familiar faces out there. Hope y'all are doing well. Just a quick background on myself and our firm. Prior to getting in this role 4 years ago, was a collegiate football coach for 8 years at the Division III and Division I level, the benefits consultant with Aflac for 5, and have been with our firm, just hit my 4-year mark. So I work on both our higher education and sports practices, so provosts and deans and vice presidents, but also coaches and athletic administrators. In terms of our firm, really kind of a soup to nuts, A to Z firm from start to finish. With the firm or with the client, working with them from literally working on the position description all the way through to negotiating with candidates at the very end in terms of getting the search to closure. So we feel our role in a search is really 3 things: recruit, advise, and facilitate a process. We don't vote. We provide recommendations and then marketplace insights to our clients. So have a few active searches going on right now. Commissioner for the Missouri Valley Conference. Also getting ready to wrap up here on our Emory athletic director search here in the next few weeks. Those are a few things that we have actively going on.
Thanks, Grant. Jeff?
Sure.
Hello again, everybody. Jeff Schemmel. I'm the old man of this group. Have been around college athletics now for 30 plus years, 25 of those on campus. Started at Kansas State, my alma mater, then to Minnesota for a long time. Then Arizona State, Conference USA, and then San Diego State. Started this firm in 2013. We do a lot of work in addition to search. We just concluded actually 3 in the last 2 years, 3 commissioner searches: Southern Conference, Big Sky, Big West. And I think we're the first ever to do a Division I commissioner search entirely by Zoom, which we did for the Big West. We had 12 candidates scheduled to come into LA on March 15th, and that all crumbled, and we ended up doing the entire search via Zoom, and it turned out pretty well. We learned how to do that very effectively, and I'm sure we're going to do more of that in the future as this continues.
Thanks, Jeff. Mike?
Well, good morning, everybody, and certainly thanks for the opportunity to participate today. I want to thank Doc Sander and his staff for putting together such a wonderful event, and hopefully this session included. As Kay said, my name is Mike Thomas. I'm with CarrSports. I've been with CarrSports for about 18 months. CarrSports has been in this space for 23 years, not just with executive search, but also management consulting. Prior to my coming on board with CarrSports, I was on campus for 35 years. Half that time as a Division I athletic director at 4 schools: Cleveland State, Akron, Cincinnati, and Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Served on numerous NCAA committees and conference committees. Other campus stops for me: University of Virginia, University of Denver, and the University of Iowa. So once again, look forward to visiting with you over the course of the next hour or so.
Thank you. Drew?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And first of all, let me say that the panel we're following, that's a tough act. They were tremendous. So excited to be invited to join you this morning. Thanks to Doc, Kay, Michael, and your team. As Kay mentioned, my name is Drew Turner. I'm a vice president with Collegiate Sports Associates. Like many of these guys, I spent time on campus before coming to the search business. I was the associate athletic director at Old Dominion prior to doing this, and also spent time at Duke and South Carolina. Since joining the firm, we've done 20, I counted this morning, 20 searches since I've been with CSA. 10 of those have been athletic director searches. Most recently, we worked with Boston College, Cincinnati, Ole Miss, Western Carolina on their searches for new ADs, and we're currently in the midst of a search at Austin Peay for a new head football coach. So while I've only been on the search side for a year and a half, we've been pretty busy, and it's been a really neat experience to transition from being on your side of the call to now on the search side. We also have, like Jeff and Mike, we have a consulting business in college athletics. and just wrapping up 4 different consulting projects that we've been doing over Zoom during the pandemic. So it's been a unique time doing everything over technology, but we're forging ahead. So happy to be with you this morning and have a good discussion.
Thank you. So this first question I'm going to open up to everyone. And if possible, I'd like to talk about it pre-COVID, and you've touched on it now post-COVID. But in general, what is the framework like for your searches, and how does it differ from in each institution, and what can these aspiring ADs expect? And Jeff, we'll kick it off with you.
Well, I think the real answer to framework is it depends on the institution. Every search is different. It has, some have committees. Most AD searches will have some sort of committee. I think the difference, and I think Mike particularly would agree with this, it used to be AD searches took some time, took anywhere from 3 to 6 months to do because of just the search committee and the timing. That has sped up considerably over the last few years. Maybe not quite as fast as a head football coach or a head basketball coach, but pretty darn fast. So I think framework is determined. What we try to do is ask the right questions right out of the gate. The school will typically tell you how they want to structure it. I do think that the COVID-19 has got us all thinking about how we do it differently. Certainly we went through that with the Big West search this spring. But I think just knowing what your client wants, what that president wants for an AD search, what that search committee wants, and how they want to proceed, I think is number one. And then our job is to implement what they ask us to do.
Mike?
Thank you, Kay. Well, I think what Jeff said, absolutely, it's a situation by situation. Based on what the school's asking for. That's one of the first phases of what we look for when we talk about assessment and strategy, setting their priorities and timeline for the search, establishing a search committee. What's that going to look like? That's not consistent from campus to campus. We do a situation analysis. We want to know what they're looking for. Okay, so when Tim Duncan mentioned fit a few minutes ago, it's what's that ideal candidate profile? What is that particular institution looking for? What are the desired outcomes for that position? And that's part of defining the ideal candidate. And the third phase is recruitment and evaluation of candidates. Identifying and recruiting candidates who fit that ideal candidate profile. At the same time, making sure that you ensure there's a diverse and a quality candidate pool from which to work. And then you get into the screening selection process, and you vet those with the folks on campus, and who are those best candidates to be part of an initial search or an interview process, paring that down to the semifinalist group, and then certainly the finalist. And so, and then the final piece really related to phase 4 is the conducting your reference and background checks. And then the final piece really, and this is most likely optional, sometimes you get involved with the negotiation piece of it, the announcement of the new athletic director, and then is there any onboarding that's involved that we might participate in?
Drew?
Yeah, I'd agree with what both of them said. Every search is unique, and what the institution, what the university is looking for in their next AD is unique to that institution. One thing that's similar in every search that we run, whether it be Boston College or Presbyterian, is and both of them mentioned this, you meet with the university, you meet with the committee to determine the profile of the AD that they're looking for. And that's one thing that I'd encourage, all of the aspiring ADs to think about when they pursue these jobs. Make sure you know what that school is looking for when you go after the job. We hear so often from candidates, we'll run, like we ran Campbell and then we ran Ole Miss, and we'll hear from the same candidate who thinks they're the perfect fit for each job. So before you start really pursuing that job, lean on the search firm and say, hey, what are they looking for? And if it doesn't fit your background, understand that you're probably not going to be a successful candidate for that. So, I just go back to the first step of every search we do is we determine what the institution is looking for, and then we go out and we try and build a candidate pool that matches that profile. One thing that I think is important to remember, the search firm does not make the hire. the president and the search committee are who ultimately makes the decision. We help facilitate the process. We may build the candidate pool based on what they're looking for, but at the end of the day, the hire is made by the president and the search committee. So, you know, like they said, every search is unique and different. We did Boston College this year over Zoom. It took us 17 days from start to finish. We did Cincinnati prior to that at the end of last year. It took us 3 months. So each search is unique, and our role is to work with the institution to help facilitate the process.
Grant?
So I think I would agree with all the gentlemen that spoke before. I think the biggest thing we do is really manage expectations on the client side and the candidate side in terms of what the client is looking for in their role. I think our job is to also encourage them to continue to expand their net in terms of what they're willing to consider or look at. As you can imagine, you know, you get a lot of questions about a diverse pool, and we get pressed to recruit a really diverse pool. You know, so if they're saying, hey, we need a fundraiser and revenue generator, well, candidly, those roles are not really diverse across campus and athletics. So our job is to look really hard for those folks, but also encourage them to really expand what they're willing to look at in terms of a background and press them on that. So if you're saying diversity is important, then we may need to look at some different profiles of candidates with that. I think what Zoom has allowed us to do is have a more inclusive process. You know, sometimes there are concerns about costs of a search. You know, flying a committee to a location or a lot of candidates into a location in a hotel can range anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000, depending on how big a committee is. So what I think it's allowed our clients to do is really include more people in their process. If they're on the fence about one or two, we would encourage them to talk to them, see more than less. It costs you an hour on Zoom, you know, versus buying another plane ticket in a hotel room and things like that. So I think what has allowed us, particularly in the first round of interviews, is have a more inclusive process, talk to more candidates, and then ultimately, what I think has not changed is still that personal interaction with the candidate to get them in front of the campus constituents, donors, the key players that are going to, you know, determine how well they do in that role. So I think that first round of interviews, I would imagine that would probably stay the same. I think a lot of the institutions are seeing the considerable cost savings that the virtual interviews are allowing, but still at the end, they're going to want to have that FaceTime with a handful of candidates.
Thank you. Mike, I'm going to kick the next question off with you. You've all touched on talent. And so I'd like you to expand on how you identify talent. And then when you reach out to those individuals, what do all of these candidates need to be ready to articulate as far as, you know, I think Drew touched on it earlier. If you say you're the perfect fit for both of them, that's going to come into conflict as the searches come on. And what do they really need to be ready to tell you once you've identified them and you're having the initial conversation?
Well, I think identifying talent starts with the types of things we're doing today with TopConnect. You know, our opportunity to engage with so many wonderful and qualified people, and whether it's TopConnect or NACTA or CALS or Next Level, Lead One, you name it. So, you know, staying engaged with our vast network of ADs and conference commissioners at CarrSports. We work with a lot of ADs on our staff, and so it's the network doesn't just end with myself or Bill Carr, right? We have a vast network. We're pretty engaged with ADs and conference commissioners across the country, and I think for the ADs to for us to know their ADs and to have ongoing discussions with them and having developed those relationships, I think are critical. We are always looking for highly qualified people in a diverse way, no question. And I think the second part, Kay, was, I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
So once you've identified the talent and you're reaching out in the initial conversations, what do the aspiring ADs need to be ready to discuss? And you know, not necessarily saying I'm ready for every single AD position, but how do they identify their value system and why they're relevant to this search?
Well, I think aspiring ADs need to, you know, talk about what their personal mission statement is and have a philosophy in place. Because when I was sitting in their chair, I can tell you early on, I was caught off guard when I'd go through a process and I would ask these type of things, and I had never really put pen to paper and thought about it. So think about those things now where you're being proactive in that way and not reactive. So when you get asked those questions about your DNA, just not as a person, but also as an athletic administrator. If you have a coaching side, same type of thing. So there are things that are part of your DNA, your personal mission statement, that aren't going to change regardless of the position that you are pursuing. However, when, for example, we've all talked about fit, so that candidate profile and what that school is looking for, and you get that phone call, is there alignment there? There's got to be alignment there, because there's got to be alignment on campus at the end of the day, because you're going to be working with a lot of people that hopefully you think like them to move the program forward. So I think the fact that you've, especially that you've put thought into this, you have a mission statement for yourself. Okay, you can talk philosophically about running a program and what that looks like, and certainly being able to address the kind of things that you would be asked about that particular institution, and if at the end of the day you're a good fit for them.
Drew?
Yeah, I would say the way we identify talent, you know, everyone in our firm, there's 4 of us who work full time, and my father started this firm 10 years ago. He was an athletic director for over 20 years at 4 different FBS institutions: Washington, NC State, Vanderbilt, and UConn. He's pretty tied into the industry. Brad Bates, who's our vice president and runs our consulting business, was the AD at Boston College in Miami. He's pretty tied into the industry. You know, I spent about a decade working on campus with the next generation. I look at this 95 participants on here, you know, from going to Lead One, TopConnect, different professional development things. I'm pretty tied into the next generation. So, you know, we identify talent by staying engaged with the industry. But in addition to that, and what's a little unique from some search firms, is we've got a pretty robust consulting business in the industry as well. Right now, I mentioned we're working on 4 consulting projects. We're working with Clemson, Indiana State, Florida A&M, and the MEAC conference right now. And so as we do those consulting projects, you know, we're working pretty intimately with the staffs at those institutions, and we can figure out, okay, this person's really good. And in fact, you know, we're working with Austin Peay on their football search, and Gerald Harrison, who's the AD there, if you don't know him, you need to, because he's a superstar, was talking with Gerald yesterday, and their chief of staff is really who I'm dealing with, a lady named Sydney Griffin. And I told Gerald, I said, man, you know, one downside of working with a search firm is we get to find out who on your team is really good, and Sydney's a stud, so you better hang on to her. So, you know, our work that we do, both on the consulting and search side, we get to work with these people, and that's how we identify talent. The second part of the question that you asked was, you know, advice to candidates as they're identified and they're pursuing a job. You know, from working on campus, I realize this as I transition. When you're on your own campus and you feel like you're doing a lot of great things at your own institution, you kind of feel like, okay, I'm a superstar here. I know what's going on. I'm really good. I'm an all-star on my campus. When you pursue these AD jobs, those people you're competing against that are interviewing for those jobs are all-stars on their campus as well. So as you look at this TopConnect group and you see all these really successful people, those are who you're competing with for jobs. So when you get a chance to interview and you determine that it's the right fit, first of all, and you're pursuing it, don't just go through the motions and think that they're lucky to be interviewing you and you're ready to be an AD. You need to prove that you're ready to be their AD at that particular institution. Recruit them to really see that you're the right fit for that place. You're ready for their job, not just a job. That's one thing that I've seen that successful candidates do really well. They prove that they're ready to be the AD at that school, not just they're ready to be an AD.
Grant?
Thanks so much. So in terms of identifying talent, I would agree with all the things that Mike talked about. We try to use our location here in Atlanta to really connect with a lot of folks, a lot of people coming in and out typically of this city for meetings and conventions and tournaments and so on and so forth. So our door's wide open. All of our contact information is on our website. I always tell people, if you're coming to Atlanta for something, send us an email a couple weeks before you're headed there. We're always happy to find time to meet with folks. We know a lot of people in the industry, but we don't know everybody. I think really in terms of relying on thought leaders in the industry, we do a lot of work with Patty Phillips at Women Leaders to help identify folks that are in their leadership programs, as well as working with the NCAA and their Pathways program and some of their other leadership programs as well. Again, relying on our network throughout the country, but also using presidents and chancellors on our higher education side, folks that they've seen and worked with. So really being able to touch all those aspects on a campus allows us to get to know more people but also when it comes to a point in referencing, we can reach pretty far across the campus to really figure out who those candidates are and their strengths and areas of growth and things like that. So I think just having that really wide net to cast it out there in terms of helping the candidate pool be really deep and diverse. We have a pretty extensive database we can reach into as well. But ADs, conference commissioners, all the things that have been said before in terms of candidate identification.
Jeff?
I'm going to expand a little bit on what a couple of people have said. I think, first of all, it is our job as consultants to our institutional clients to get to know each of you. I've seen too many where someone applies for a job and the first thing that one of you gets is a 10-page questionnaire from one of us that says, "Who are you?" It's our job to get to know you. It's our job to find out your abilities and what makes you a good fit for a job. So that's number one. And we certainly have to, our job is to find the best fit for our clients. Secondly, I want to talk, Mike talked about a personal philosophy. I think that is so important for each of you. You are going to be asked in any interview your philosophy, especially today with all the issues that are flying around our business and around the country and the world today. We laugh about it all the time, but we say, as we get more experience and do our jobs every day, we learn, yes, what to do, but we sure as heck learn a lot about what not to do. And I think make sure that you all keep your list together. I used to do that before I became an athletic director. Keep my list of, and maybe it was in my head, but boy, I'm never going to do that. So make sure that you formulate that personal philosophy, and I say that to coaches as well that want to be head coaches. You're going to be asked about your personal philosophy, how to manage an organization, how to handle coaches, how to handle all the myriad of things that we're living with today. And thirdly, I think every one of you needs a champion. Every one of you, when you apply for a job and you become a finalist, we, or at least the institution, is going to start making calls about you, and make sure that you do have a couple of champions, that whether they're your current boss or someone you've worked with before. Every search that we have, we ask the question about how each of you treats the people around you. That is such an important piece of the puzzle. And I can't stress enough, from the last session, all of those ADs said, hey, do good work at what you do today. For sure do that. But a big piece of that is how you treat the people around you, both above you and below you.
Thanks, Jeff. I actually want to touch on something that Grant brought up with regard to the Pathways program, because I remember going through that interview process. So Mike Hill in the last session had talked about start reaching out to the firms now and letting them know that you're aspiring someday or that you have an interest. So I'd like to ask you guys, one, how would you recommend that these attendees reach out to you just to make a connection? And then two, what kind of personal prep would you recommend they go through? Because I remember in that Pathways program, it was extensive and it was very helpful because your flaws or your weaknesses come out very quickly. And I'll open that up to anybody on the panel to jump in.
Yeah, I'll speak first to, how do you make a connection with the search firm? Because I had an instance that just the other day that was an example of what not to do. As everybody knows, the William and Mary AD search recently opened up. We're not working with them. They've named an interim, but I get a cold text message from a number that I don't have that says, hey, Drew, hope you're doing well. Would love to catch up soon. And in 2 spaces, it said, by the way, do you know what's going on with the William and Mary AD search? That would be an example of how not to build a relationship with a search firm. When there's an ulterior motive, and obviously you want something, the only reason you're reaching out to me is because you want to try and get this job, that's not a genuine relationship. So on how to build these relationships, all of us on this panel and all the search firms, we've got really good relationships in the industry. And if you don't know us, I'm pretty confident that we've got a mutual relationship that could provide an introduction. Like anything, in fundraising, which is my background, when you're trying to meet a new donor, the best way to do it is through a common relationship that can provide an introduction. I would encourage you to do the same thing with a search firm. The cold email that, you're found our email online and you're trying to meet us, we'll respond, but I promise you, you're going to have it's going to be a better relationship if you use a mutual relationship to try and introduce yourself or have somebody provide an introduction. So I just had that happen the other day and wanted to mention it.
Yeah, Kay, I would agree with what Drew said. And, the people who are visiting with today, you need to take the initiative. You need to be assertive and reach out to the search firms. And, you need to take that initiative. And, I was doing the roundtable discussion just now, and I think each and every one of the folks that I visited with would tell you that I mentioned that to them. And, if you're in Atlanta, go see Jeff Schemmel. All right. I'm sure Grant will buy you a coffee if you go see Grant at the Parker Suites. Right. So engage these people. And, you need to know who these players are, and not every campus uses a search firm, but a good number of them do. So once again, you want to be proactive in that sense. You don't want to be reactive. You don't want to have the experience or be the person who's sending Drew that type of text message. And along the lines of what Drew said, on the fundraising side, if you're unwilling to do that and being assertive with the search firms, how are you going to ask donors for money as an AD, right? I mean, it's almost like a cultivation process, right? Just like it is with the search firms. And I'll tell you, yesterday, as part of the roundtable discussion, someone had asked the question about search firms, and they said, talking to search firms and reaching out to them or cornering a search consultant at NACDA, I feel disingenuous. I don't feel sincere. And, I feel like I'm using them, so to speak. And they felt funny about it. And I said, well, I think you need to look at it through a different lens. You're probably doing them a favor, right? Because part of our job is being engaged with you, as already said, getting to know each and every one of you, developing strong candidate pools for these institutions who hire us. So think about it in a way that you are, as Drew said, an all-star in your own right. Take the initiative. Most likely you're doing the search consultant a favor by introducing yourself, opening up to them, and starting that relationship, because each and every one of us are always interested in strengthening and meeting aspiring ADs and strengthening those pools when we're put in the position to develop them for a particular search.
Grant, Jeff, do you want to touch on anything or talk about that interview prep process that our attendees need to think through?
Well, I would add to what Mike just said. It really is our job to get to know you every bit as much as you getting to know us. And it reminds me of the advice I give to AD colleagues or any of you about, and I think Debbie Yao said this yesterday, we try to return every call. We try to respond to every email. And if you email us or if you call us, we will return it. And there's nothing more that I like to do than to spend 15 minutes on the phone, or now we have Zoom, with each of you and just get to know you better. So as Mike said, that's a great example. Do not be bashful about getting a hold of us. We are available. It is our job, quite frankly. When an institution hires us, we got to know the best fits among your group for that institution.
I'll touch on the interview prep, but on the connection piece, I would also say is we don't have to know you prior to the search for you to get a job via one of our searches. There are a handful of searches I've worked on where we got a nomination on a candidate, had never had a conversation with them, got to know them in a process, were really intrigued by their candidacy, and ultimately those candidates got the job. So I think relationships obviously help, but I also want to be really clear is we don't have a stable of candidates we don't have to know you in order for you to get a job, those kind of things. So I want to make sure everyone on here knows that as well. In terms of the interview prep, I would just tell you, use a lot of the resources that are on your campuses. You've got a lot of great thought leaders. Get to know your president, your chancellor, your provost. Get to know your sitting AD, your SWA and deputy. They've probably been through these processes. They can tell you certain questions to anticipate. Utilize your career services on your campus, just like you send your student athletes there. They can probably, put some mock questions together for you to answer it and videotape it and kind of play it back for you. So I think those are things, you probably have a lot more resources on your campus than you might think in terms of preparation for these interviews. I know we've all been virtual here for the last few months. We continue, some people say, well, I'm better in person. Well, that's just the environment we're in. You got to be really comfortable in these settings and being able to really talk about yourself. I think that's something that's really hard for a lot of candidates is being able to share what you've done to really move your department forward in certain areas. So getting comfortable, being able to talk about yourself and your successes, because that's what they really want to know is what have you done to improve where you are with that. So those would be a couple of things I would share with y'all.
Great, thank you.
Kay, can I make one more comment on interview prep? Because we did the Western Carolina search and they hired a guy named Alex Gary, who was the deputy AD from Oregon State. And after the search ended and Alex and I were talking, and we kind of talked through how he prepared for the search. And I thought this example was really good and interesting on how he prepared. Alex came up through revenue generation. He was a fundraiser. He was external at Oregon State. But he knew that going into this interview, it was a 15-person committee representation from external constituents to campus leadership, all different backgrounds. And so he knew he was going to get a question about Title IX or a compliance issue. And so he said the week leading up to the in-person interview, he didn't research or study any of his revenue generation, any of his fundraising questions that may come up. Instead, he put all his focus on the areas that he was not as familiar with, because he knew he needed to better prepare those. He said, look, I'm gonna get a question about running a campaign or fundraising or how I engage a donor. That's second nature. I can do that in my sleep. So instead, he shifted his focus to the areas that he wasn't as experienced in, and ultimately got the job. And it was one of the best interviews I've seen in doing it. So just a thought as you prepare, maybe spend a little more time on those areas that you're not as familiar in, because I promise you those questions are coming.
Thanks, Drew. I'm going to open this up to one of our attendees. Randall Richmond from Old Dominion University has a question. Would you unmute your mic, please?
Hey, Randale Richmond. And as I get started, I first want to apologize to Drew about that text. I mean, I thought it was a private matter, but here we are. Nonetheless, diversity of thought, leadership, background, and all type of experience is beneficial. It's financially beneficial to an organization. And as many of you have already said, you as a search firm, is not your job to place a candidate. It's your job to bring forward the best pool possible. How do you navigate that space, knowing that you've seen how diversity helps and helps in leadership, but maybe that institution doesn't see that in terms of what their particular fit is? And I'm not just talking about race or gender, even about different positions in terms of internal or external. How do you navigate that particular space?
Well, I'll take a shot at that first. I do think that more so today than ever, we don't have any institutional clients that isn't the first question out of their mouths as well, is how can you help us put together a diverse pool? And Randale, you're right. It's not just minorities. It's not just women. It is internal, external. Now, sometimes every AD search, I think I said this yesterday, every search we do is probably for one of two reasons. One is somebody didn't do a good job, or somebody did such a good job that they moved on to a better job. So you have to, your client's going to tell you what they're looking for right out of the gate, but it's our job, and again, very important piece of our job, that we spend a lot of time on a daily basis making sure that we know the people in our business that are good. You have to be good at what you do, for sure. But where is that best pool candidates that is diverse in all those ways. It really does fall upon us, and we really do fall. And I know my colleagues have mentioned, but Patty Phillips we use a lot. We use the NCAA diversity group. We're very involved in that. It really is our job to know who those good people are.
Thanks, Jeff. Taurian Houston from Rice University, would you unmic and tell me if I pronounced that right? If I didn't, I apologize.
Okay, it's Taurian.
Taurian, okay.
So if you could call me anything except late for dinner, so it's all right with me. All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for everybody on the call. So reflecting on a conversation I had with a former supervisor of mine as an AD, and they always talk about when going through research or when going through thinking about the next athletic director for an institution, they say presidents hire ADs who lead coaches who serve student athletes. And so when we think about that, when you're getting that feedback on campus and you're getting the feedback from faculty members, from coaches and student athletes and everybody alike, how much stock, or are you putting stock into a particular subset of groups or individuals when you're looking at building that candidacy pool?
We'll open that up, Sam.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I think the advice you got from your supervisor was accurate. I mean, I think one thing that's consistent, while every search we do is unique to the institution, one thing that's consistent is every institution wants a really strong leader who can lead coaches and have the student athletes top of mind. One thing that I think, and this may not really answer your question exactly how you like it, but I think it'll be helpful. One thing that I think I've seen that really successful candidates do, those who ultimately get the job do really well, is when they're going through the interview process and they're asked the question, they talk in experience versus in ideas and philosophies and thoughts. So if a question comes about, all right, tell us about your leadership philosophy. The person who says, oh, I'm a servant leader, I always lead from the back and not from the front. Keep in mind, and this is going to be repetitive for the group we met with yesterday, but keep in mind that there's 5 other people who are getting that same question. And your answer about your philosophy or ideas or thoughts is going to be forgotten. So when you answer your questions, talk about what you've actually done at Houston or whatever institution that you're coming from that demonstrates I've got this experience and I can do this. So instead of saying you lead from the back and you're a servant leader, talk about a situation that's happened on your campus where you demonstrated leadership that will stick out. So when they go and debrief, they say, well, Taurian had a really good answer about his leadership style, because the others who said, oh, I'm a servant leader, they're going to forget that and it's not going to stick with them. So I guess my advice would be, when you're sitting in that interview room and you prepare for those questions, think about things that you've actually done and talk about your experience, because at the end of the day, they're not hiring you for your ideas. They're hiring for what you're actually going to do and what you've done.
Taurian, I guess to add to what Drew said, and I mentioned this when we talked about the process itself, and for us, the initial phases of going through an assessment with campus, we call it a situation analysis as, the ideal candidate profile. You've heard me say that a few times, okay? You talked about different stakeholders on campus that give their input. So you're looking at the fabric of what that ideal candidate profile should look like. At the end of the day, it's been said here a number of times, the president or chancellor is most likely going to be making this decision. But that fit piece is critical because at the end of the day, it impacts culture, it impacts alignment, okay, and how this athletic director is going to align with campus and other people that they're going to be working with on a daily basis, and also retention. Because if you're not a good fit, right, someone might be making a decision eventually that, hey, you know what, we stubbed our toe on this one. Or the AD might sit there and say, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and maybe I need to move on. So that's important too from a retention standpoint. So you're obviously going to hear from a lot of people on campus, and a lot of people, when they do that kind of assessment, I will tell you, also include external stakeholders to give their input as well.
Mike Bamonti from the University of Illinois, Chicago. Would you unmic and ask your question, please?
Thank you, Kay, and thank you all for the last 2 days. So many tremendous takeaways. Extremely grateful. So if you find yourself, if the search firm is involved in an AD search and you find yourself, making your way through the interview process, you're in the top 10, top 6, whatever, you're getting close, right? If you're kind of in the mix there and you don't get the gig, what does that look like in terms of the flow of feedback? In okay, well, here's even though you're in the mix and the fit looked good, how candid, how direct, what does that look like in terms of doing a post-mortem after the fact if the ball doesn't bounce your way and you aren't presented with that opportunity? Thank you.
Michael, what I'd say is I'm sure all of us take pretty detailed notes in terms of our discussions with our clients. Some of that's going to remain, kind of client privilege, but I'm always open to having that constructive feedback that's going to help you move forward in a process. Typically where I like to do it is once the search is closed, because you never know where these searches may go. They could take a wild turn and you need to come back to somebody and maybe they didn't like the feedback you gave them 2 weeks ago. So what I've learned is to provide that once the search is closed, and we'll provide you the insights that are going to help you, move forward in these processes.
And I would say, just very briefly, you should never hesitate. If you get to that position and you're one of the finalists and you don't get the job, you should never hesitate to ask us. We will be candid with you about our thoughts. And I know Tim Duncan said last time, hey, you did everything right. He's heard that before, but you weren't the right fit. We have said that a few times, but if there are things, I've been in a search where a candidate for a very prominent Division I job asked me if he should bring with him a PowerPoint. I said, you bring what you'd like to bring and what you want the committee to see. And unfortunately, the committee never asked a question in 2 hours. He did his PowerPoint for 2 hours. And then he wanted to know why he didn't get the job. And I explained to him that probably spending your entire time on the PowerPoint was not the right way to go. So I do think we will give you feedback, at least I will give you candid feedback relative to your interview.
Drew, did you want to add anything?
No, I would just agree. I think we work really hard, and candidly, I've learned this from my dad in the way that he deals with candidates who are unsuccessful. We provide really constructive feedback because our role is we want you to be best prepared for the next opportunity you get. And if we just tell you, hey, you know what, you did a really good job, it just went the other way, I mean, it's hard to get better from hearing that. We've all have managed people. We've all been managed by people. The only way you get better or somebody gets better is by learning what they can work on. And so we try really hard, as simple as telling somebody, and this happened in a recent search, we say, hey, look, your eye contact was terrible. You looked at the floor the whole time. Look up at the people that are interviewing. We'll tell you as simple as that. One candidate wasn't smiling enough. They looked really tough and hard, and the committee just couldn't feel comfortable with them. I mean, we'll give you feedback like that. That particular candidate, they were in another search with us later on. The whole time they had the biggest smile you've ever seen. So they heard it. So, like these guys said, candid feedback, we try really hard to give you that.
I'd like to follow up on your comments there with regard to, you learn the most from a bad situation or your mistakes. Can you each of you give us examples of things that you've seen that were just really need to stay away from or avoid, or big mistakes that you've seen candidates make throughout the interview process?
I'll tell you, and I'm sorry to go back to back, guys. I apologize, but this one's top of mind. I've seen, we're doing a search right now. The biggest mistake that a lot of folks typically make, whether it be a coaching or an AD search or whatever, you get the first question, which you'll get in any search you go through. Tell us about yourself and why you're interested in this position. Do not spend 15 minutes, or in Jeff's case, or a 2-hour PowerPoint. Do not spend 15 minutes talking about yourself, because you're going to lose the committee or the AD or the president or whoever you're talking to right off the bat. And it's going to be really hard to get their attention back. We did a mock interview thing during the pandemic called Social Distance University. And if some of you attended, you probably saw this. One of the candidates who was terrific. I mean, he will be an AD. He spent 13 minutes on that first question. And it was so difficult to get our attention back. that he lost us. So just trust the interview process. Trust that your character, your values, and your experiences are going to come out with the questions asked. Don't feel like you have to regurgitate that all at the start and get everything about yourself out in the first question. It'll come. So take your time and trust the process.
Kay, I would say a few things related to the start of the process to the end of the process. And the first thing is your cover letter and your resume. And the number of resumes and cover letters I would receive, whether I was an athletic director or now on the search side as a search consultant with typos, or they were 3 or 4 pages long. It needs to be tight. It needs to be concise. It needs to be proofread. It needs to be action oriented. It needs to catch their attention. And, but once again, it needs to be clean. I would also say, as you get into the preparation piece, preparation is imperative. There needs to be a balance. So you don't want to go in and be the smartest person in the room or know more about campus than the people that are doing the interview. But I am so surprised sometimes at how ill-prepared candidates are for an athletic director position, ill-prepared from a preparation standpoint and knowing about campus, knowing about the department in which they will be overseeing, knowing something about the community. So I'm not saying that's where you put all your eggs, but I think you need to know, a good bit. And you know, if you're talking to 5 different candidates, it's easy to pick out the ones who haven't done any preparation versus those who come in an hour later and have done their homework. And sometimes it's small things. I can tell you when I applied for associate AD job at the University of Virginia, it was probably good that I knew it was called grounds, not campus. It was probably good to know that they're their first year, they're not freshmen. So I did even small things, make sure that you do your homework. I also think when you do your preparation, to know a little bit about the people that you're going to be in the room with that are going to be interviewing you. Okay, you don't need to know their life story, but have a tidbit of information that's helpful when you walk around the room and you meet those people, and they'll know that you're somewhat engaged in the research that you did, and you know a little bit about them. And the final thing I will say, it has to do with references. And you know, there's a difference between your contact list on your phone and those people that you have relationships with. And make sure when you use references that you know what those people are going to say about you, right? And so, you know, if they're going to use you, or if you're going to use them, then you need to know what they're going to say about you. Because, you know, if they're very candid and frank, it may not be something that puts you in the best light or positions you best for that position. So I think, you know, at the start, in the materials that you send in, going through the process, those are the key things that come to top of mind for me right now.
And Kay, that's such a good question. And I'm furiously writing down things here because not just in these 8 years that we've had this firm that we've done so many searches, but as especially with Mike on this call, how many searches have we done, Mike, in our old jobs? And we've seen how people conduct themselves and the mistakes they make. So I jotted down a couple things. One, I can't tell you, and of course we're in a COVID-19 situation now, but when we get back to normal and we're doing in-person interviews, I can't tell you how many times I've seen candidates walk in the room and forget to shake hands, both when they walk in the room and when they walk out of the room. Shake hands both times and introduce yourself. Number 2, and Mike touched on this, know the committee, know who they are. Some of the most impressive interviews I've seen when we didn't have nameplates in front of the search committee members in a personal interview was a candidate who knew the names of each of those as he addressed their questions. So know that. Mike mentioned references, and it goes with what I said earlier. We'll certainly call your references, but we're going to call other people that you haven't listed that you've worked with and worked around, because we want to get to know. We assume references are going to say good things about you. And I've been around, and Mike and I both have been around long enough. We probably know somebody at every institution around the country, or somebody who does. So we're going to do our homework too on you. So make sure that people are saying good things about you. And again, it goes back to how you treat the people around you. And the last thing I noted was, be honest, be ready to answer the tough question. A question that you'll typically get, we certainly advise our clients to ask it, is to say, hey, what is the toughest situation you've had? And it's typically around a student athlete that you've had to deal with in your career. And maybe if you had to do it over again today, how would you handle it? I think that is, and you have to be honest about mistakes that you've made in your career. We've all made them. So we asked a coach, a very prominent Power 5 coach one time who had gotten fired, what happened at that institution? And he blamed it all on the institution and not himself. And that may have been true, but it wasn't the right answer. So I think be ready for those types of questions as well.
I would say two things. One, listen. They'll tell you what they're looking for if you just listen to what they're asking. I think listening to the consultants or the hiring manager, if you're having questions about what are they looking for in this next opportunity. We recently worked on a search where a candidate had direct conversation with the hiring manager because there was a relationship, and pretty much told him probably not going to go that direction. Person applied anyways, obviously didn't get an interview. We called them to turn them down, and they were shocked. I learned a lot about that candidate from 2 conversations with that hiring manager and them trying to move forward in a process that they were pretty much told probably not going to go your way. So the questions you're asked, listen. You see a lot of candidates come in with maybe 3 or 4 talking points, and that's what they stick to in an interview. But they're asking you those specific questions for a reason. On the flip side of that, when you look at your preparation, really thoughtful questions for the committee. We're always going to encourage candidates, get off the athletic website. Go look at the university website, look at the strategic plan, look at the mission statement. What does this institution stand for? Because you cannot operate in a silo on these campuses. So you need to understand, what is the institution really striving for at the end of the day? Athletics may be mentioned in the strategic plan. Where does it fall? Certain universities are using it as a driver for enrollment and applications and things like that. So this role could be really critical to the health and strength of a university. So asking really good questions, even directing them to certain committee members. Make sure you get the student athletes engaged. If they're on the committee, ask them questions. That's a group that typically, you got to love on the student athletes, because I'll tell you what student athletes do. They will tell it like it is. I've seen student athletes cut off a candidate at the knees when the committee wouldn't say it. The student athletes did. The student athletes are pretty transparent. So engage them, ask them questions, but even having those kind of pointed questions directly at people because their area of expertise, that's a question that you have. So those would be some things I'd share with you.
Thanks. We have one more question. Kyle George from Troy University. Would you unmute?
Okay. And I'll be brief. I know we got a time crunch here for it, but kind of touching back on something that Mike mentioned earlier about the personal mission statement. What suggestions do you have for crafting that statement as well as your core values to where it doesn't sound like you're just regurgitating information from a book, and that's a genuine statement that represents you as an individual?
That's never easy, right? It's sometimes it's hard to talk about yourself, and sometimes it's difficult to write about yourself. But most likely your DNA and your mission statement just didn't happen. It started probably well before you were a college student or college student athlete. There's some core pieces, some core values that you believe in. And let's face it, a lot of those core values may be some of the same core values that other people will have as well. Heck, it's no different than when you look at strategic plans on websites. You look at the core values. Heck, you can probably tell before you even open it up that 8 or 10 of them are going to look alike, right? So I think the fact that you just do a deep dive, you take the time to think about the things that you truly believe in as an individual and as an administrator. A lot of those things are things that are in the headlines today. That you need to focus on. Think about philosophically the things that are important to you as a person, but also how you would run a department, what that recipe would look like. So I think it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that you're going to sit down and it's like, hey, there's a final exam tomorrow and you're going to get it done in a couple hours. I think over time you accomplish that, and it's going to get better over time before it really becomes a finished product. Okay, and so it's never an easy thing to do. I know for me it isn't anyway. For some reason, when I try to sit down and think about myself in that way, I tend to get writer's block. But I think it's I think it's also okay to talk to people who know you well, that you've spent time with, that you work with, that are mentors, that are people that are that know you well and that your DNA, and ask them, you know, what they think and what they think about you and what their thoughts are. And it'll be interesting because you'll probably see some patterns, because sometimes it's difficult to see yourself in a way that other people see you. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer. But I know for me, as I said earlier, when I went through this process back in the dark ages for the first time, we weren't, you know, those were things that I never thought about. And then guess what? When I was asked to do it and I had prepared, it was like a final exam. And it probably wasn't my best work. I think eventually it got there, but it took some time.
Kyle, if I could add, Kyle, great question. You know, I think anybody can prepare a statement and deliver it to a committee. But what's going to really emphasize that you live by that statement is your answers to the other questions and the experiences that you've had that demonstrate you don't just say those things, but you live them. You know, one question that we ask, or we don't ask, we advise the committees and the presidents to ask in pretty much every search that kind of gets to that is, and if you're in one of our searches or you've been through, you've probably heard this, tell us about an event or a situation in your background where your response best revealed your true character. And that answer will give them an experience or something that you've done that revealed your core values. So, you know, anybody can sit in there, and we have so much of this professional development stuff where we continue to tell you, know your personal core values, know your mission statement, know these things. So pretty much everybody's interviewing is going to have something like that. But your answers and your experiences that you've done will demonstrate those. So in my opinion, and from what I've seen as I've sat through these, it's those who can talk about what they've done that demonstrate those core values more than those who can just tell them.
I think Drew's absolutely right. I think those two need to align, and what you say to what they ask you certainly will trump what you share with them in writing.
And as you look at when you put that personal statement together and you establish what your core values are, whether that's 2 core values or 7 core values, put a story behind every one of those core values. Drew is so right. The committee will remember not that what you stand for, because you're going to be like everybody else. If you tell a story behind it and that experience that you had, it will be memorable.
Well, I just would like to thank everyone on the panel. We're very fortunate to have all of you. We really appreciate your time. I know I could ask you questions for hours if we had more time, but I am standing between the attendees and lunch, so I will not do that.